Save. Okay. Okay. Okay, Johar, do you see me, or does anyone else see me and hear me, hopefully? Okay, come on. Okay, perfect. I don't know what was going on, but for some reason, YouTube doesn't like it when I schedule a stream. Like if I make a stream go live at say 6:30 p.m. tomorrow, it doesn't work for some reason. But if I just open a stream and say, okay, here we go, it works fine. And for some reason, it wasn't working on my phone either. But here we are. Okay, great. All right, Johar and Axel X, hello. Okay, let's see if anyone else shows up, hopefully. Okay, I'll just open my email to see if there are some students. Okay. All right. Sent. Where are we? Okay. Let's see. Let me just reply here quickly. On my channel. All right, Shug is here. Great. Okay, with 8 people, can we get up to double digits? Come on, there seems to be a lot of demand for this sort of thing. Let's see if anyone else shows up. Okay, and so far everyone can hear me, right? I know Johar can. Okay. Okay. Sent items. All right. Okay, great. Okay. So, what do you guys want to talk about? Oh, I guess I'll get started and say that the format of the exam will be very similar to the previous one. You'll probably get about 20 questions, and I'll ask you to answer 15. There's a wide range. So, if, for example, you don't know early modern English that well, you can focus on Old English and Middle English. That's fine. If you know 2 chapters well, you should be okay for this one. And I do think that this is an easier exam than the last one. The last one had a lot of challenging content, but this one I think is more specific and in a way it's easier. It covers less material. And as always, I'm not going to expect you to know a bunch of detailed things. Like I'm not going to ask you to give me all the ways vowels change during the great vowel shift or something like that. But I might ask you, what was the great vowel shift, and can you give me one example of a sound that changed? Or can you give me an example of a sound shift that occurred from Old English to Middle English, or from Middle English to Early Modern, or something like that? So in short, just think about the broad, like the big changes. What are the highlights, the most important, notable changes that happened, and maybe an example of each. You don't need to know names and dates that much. It's probably a good idea to know who William the Conqueror is, but I'm not going to ask you about other monarchs or queens and kings. And you should know a couple of major dates, especially when the periods we have studied begin and end. So when does Old English begin and end? When does Middle English begin and end? And when does Early Modern English begin and end? And some of the dates are arbitrary, but some of them are there for a good reason. For example, was there an invasion? And if so, who invaded whom? But as far as dates go, that's about it. Am I just talking to myself? Should I keep going? I'm running out of things to say. The Danes, okay. Don't need to know this. The There was an area of England called the Danelaw or the Danelaw. So the Vikings invaded several times. King Alfred defeated them, but he let them sort of live in an area called the Danelaw or the Danelaw. The English called the Vikings Danes. I guess for whatever reason, that's what they called them. So we do have Danes today. People from Denmark are called Danes, but the Anglo-Saxons referred to Vikings as Danes. I'm not going to ask you about that, but in case you were curious, that's the answer. If, however, you're wondering who were I guess the people before the Danes who invaded England, it was the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. All right, Johar asks, you mentioned the great vowel change or the great vowel shift. Would I be incorrect if I mentioned that vowels went from a single vowel sound to something called a diphthong? You would get partial credit for sure. So the great vowel shift, there were probably almost all the vowel sounds in Old and Middle English shifted. So the E sound, as in riche or ik or ik, became I. Uh, in a couple of cases, the vowels became diphthongs. The diphthong is just two vowel sounds at the same time. So I is a diphthong, but O or A is a monophthong. So yeah, a couple of the vowels became diphthongs. The E, the letter I, in other words, became an I in after the great vowel shift, and U as in hus became an O. So instead of hus, it was house. That is one example of change that happened thanks to the great vowel shift. There are other ones, for example, the vowel in the word feet, like the things on, the things we put our shoes in, that used to be pronounced fet, but then e became e, and fod became food. So in most cases, the vowel just shifted. It went from like a front vowel to a back vowel or something like that. But there were two cases where a vowel became a diphthong. So if you say what Johar wrote, you would get partial credit. And if you can give me the example of one specific example of a vowel that became a diphthong, you get full credit. The E and the U, like the U. So hus became house, and the E became I, which became I. Exactly, yes. In Shakespeare's day, they still probably pronounced I like I, but even I is a diphthong. I. It's not one vowel. It's two vowels. If you, yes, Johar, if you wrote on the exam what you wrote here, you'd get full credit. Or if you say, the great vowel shift is when, as a bunch of sound changes happened. And another example is, so the word great, as in he's a great man, used to be pronounced gret. So gret became a, or nam became name. But the two most significant ones are the E became I and U became O. Shug asks, will there be a question comparing Old and Early English? I think what you mean here is Old and Early Modern English. Yeah, I mean, it's a good idea to keep in mind what are the main characteristics of Old English and Middle English and Early Modern English, and how, say, we went from old to middle and how we went to from middle to early modern. So, for example, from Old English to Middle English, the pronunciation didn't change that much, right? The Great Vowel Shift hadn't happened yet, and except for one phoneme, Middle English still had a lot of the sounds Old English had. They still had the ch sound, for example, as in thochte. They still pronounced it that way. But the big difference from Old English to Middle English was grammar. There were huge changes grammatically. Off the top of my head, I can think of one. Grammatical gender was completely lost. Old English was very complex and it had grammatical gender, so nouns had gender. So if you had to watch out for that. In the same way that French and Arabic and German still have gender, and Spanish does as well, but that was completely lost in Middle English. The change from Middle English to early modern was largely phonology. The pronunciation changed, but the spelling didn't. So in English, even today, we use very conservative spellings. We still spell words the way they were in Chaucer's day, but the pronunciation changed radically from between Middle English to early modern English. And again, I won't ask you everything, but try to think of at least one significant difference between, say, Old English and Middle English, or Middle English and early modern English. All right, we are up to double digits. We have 16 viewers. That's more like it. Let's see if we can get up to, 15. Let's see if we can get up to 20. By the way, while we're waiting, I recently found my midterm and my final exam from a very similar class I took when I was in my fourth year in Canada back in 2003. And I'm tempted to post at least the midterm for you guys just to see what the midterm I wrote looked like. So, lest you think the exams you write in this class are difficult, you ain't seen nothing yet. The ones we had to write were about 3 times as long, and there were all kinds of questions, essay length questions, identification, and so on. So if you guys like, I can post that. I don't want to confuse you with it, but I can post it before or after the exam, just so you guys can get a sense of what that looks like. Okay, 2 questions. Concord was lost as well, right? Yes, Old English observed Concord. Old English observed Concord in the way that, say, Arabic does now, although it even had more Concord. And yes, Concord was lost in Middle English. An adjective was not feminine or masculine or plural or singular. It was just there. Something was good. Whereas in Old English, the adjective good would have a gender and would have a number as well. So yes, Concord was lost in Middle English. Johar asks another question. Regarding Old English, I can't shake the feeling that a question will pop up regarding dragan, draw, like a translation and its meaning nowadays. No, I'm not going to ask you what does this Old English word mean, but that's one example of a sound shift right there, right? The word uh, used to be pronounced dragan in Old English, and it was pronounced drawan in Middle English. So yeah, don't worry about that. Bonus question maybe, but that's getting into advanced territory. I'm not going to ask you what does this Old English word mean. Lucky lazy gamer, is that a? I'm not sure I can identify that emoji. I thought it was the tongue sticking out one. Yeah, it would be interesting. For me, it was nostalgic. Oh, shocked face. Okay, I'm not sure what the shock is for, though. Maybe you guys can help me out. Yeah, okay. I'll post it for you guys. I think you might get a kick out of it. But I believe it was 3 hours long, and we had to demonstrate, different types of questions. I mean, our competence with different types of questions. And there was history, there were dates, there were references to Beowulf. There were lots of vocabulary on there, some of which I've forgotten. A lot of names were mentioned in the slides. Do we have to recognize all of them? Which names are you referring to? If it's names of people, not really. I don't, not sure I mentioned that many people. But as far as kings and queens go, not really. I mean, it's a good idea to know who William the First was, William the Conqueror, but that's about it. Maybe William Caxton, who brought printing to England. He brought it from Europe. But that's about it. I'm not going to ask you who was Henry II or who brought printing to England. He brought it from Europe. But that's about it. I'm not going to ask you who was Henry II or whom did Henry III marry or anything like that. I think one reason I showed the names of the monarchs is to show that after the Norman conquest, England lost a lot of its English names. Most names, even today, we use in English are not really originally English names. So, Henry, that's a French name. Richard, that's a French name. William, that's a French name. They come from French. The only Anglo Saxon name you might see these days is Alfred, and even that's rare. And we haven't had an Alfred monarch since the 9th century. So we're about due. Yeah, Alfred. Okay. All right, so I got three in a row. Can you recap the Inkhorn controversy? So, in the early modern period, especially around the time of Shakespeare, the 1500s, early 1600s, a lot of literate people wanted to enrich the English language, which they thought was kind of barbarous because it wasn't as rich as, say, Latin or Greek. So they made up these big words that come from Greek or Latin, and many of which we still use. Many of them we don't, but a lot of them we still do use. And so these were called inkhorn terms. And the reason they're called inkhorn is because, well, back then, if you wanted to write something, you needed a quill, which you dipped in ink, which was in an inkhorn. And so their inkhorn controversy was the debate about the importing these big foreign words into English. So some people thought, yes, we need to enrich English using these big, fancy polysyllabic words from Greek and Latin. And other people thought, no, we need to keep English pure and we don't need these foreign words that come from Greek and Latin. That was the essence of the controversy. Okay, Kelsey agrees. I think it is best to show your old exam after. Okay, I think that's good advice too. After the exam, I will post my old exam. Speaking of people, any important figures we should keep in mind generally or regarding the Inkhorn controversy? I don't think I mentioned any specific names when it comes to the Inkhorn controversy. There are plenty. I can't think of any off the top of my head. But as far as writers, there's maybe a couple of dictionary writers, lexicographers, to use the fancy schmancy word, that we talked about last week. So that's about it. But otherwise, there are very few names. Johar asks, do we have to know the Concord regarding Old English and Middle English generally or more in depth? Well, there was no Concord in Middle English, so that makes life easier. But as long as you can explain what it means that Old English lost Concord, then that's fine. So, I mean, you can use an example from Arabic, for instance, and say, Sayara Jadida is something we say in Arabic which observes concord. The adjective matches the noun in number and gender, which is something Old English used to do, but it lost that completely in the Middle English period. Something like that would be fine. Lucky lazy gamer, should we memorize any dates like 449 CE? Yeah. Yes, there are some. There aren't many dates. That's the good news, but there are some important ones. Even if you don't get the dates precisely, at the very least, what you should be able to do is tell me what are the what are the when we're talking about Old English, let's say, what years are we talking about? So roughly 500 CE to 1100 CE. When we're talking about Middle English, we're talking 1100 to 1500, something like that. In the case of the Old English period, we do have specific dates, 449 to 1066, and we use these for very good reasons because two invasions occurred. So apart from 449 and 1066, and maybe 1604, I can't think of many dates that you should remember. Johar, sorry, maybe I don't understand what I'm talking about. I mean the gender of words in these periods. Yeah, so concord, when we're talking about concord, it means the best illustration of concord is when adjectives match their nouns, what they modify in terms of gender or number. So if you, in Arabic, you have to say sayara jadida. You don't say sayara jadid. Why? Because sayara is a feminine noun and jadida is feminine as well. That's concord right there. Old English used to have that, but it lost it. That's all it is. Declensions, yeah, that's now declensions are or cases. Old English used to have those, and that's when you take a noun. It's like conjugating a noun, right? We don't really do that much anymore. If you take a noun like dog, you can make it plural, you can make it possessive, but that's about it. You can't really do anything else to it. But in Old English, you could. You could add something to the word dog to make it the object of a sentence. You can add something to make it the what we call the dative case. Those were completely lost in Middle English. The only other way we use them today is with pronouns. I is what we say nominative, and me is the object case. Okay, so that's really the only way we use it now, but in Old English, they did that for every noun. Roa asks, I'm not sure if you've already covered this, but how many examples should we know about the changes of pronunciation in Old English, consonants and vowels? If you can just think of at least one, that's enough. So if I ask you, demonstrate you how the phonology changed from Old English to Middle English or Middle English to early modern English, give me one solid example. Okay, other question. Shakespeare was writing early modern English? Yes, that is correct. Okay, Axel asks, you mentioned in one of the slides, English imports a lot of French and Latin loanwords. Should we memorize some of them? The vocabulary, no. I mean, if you can think of one, that's great, like government, for example, but I'm probably not going to ask you. But I might ask you which which from which language did many words enter English in the Middle English period, something like that. Lucky lazy gamer, I still remember the stone example. Yeah, that's a good example. So you could right now you can only write stone two or three ways. We could say stone, stones plural, and stones possessive. That's it. But in Old English, you could write stone in one way to be the direct object, and another way to be the plural dative, and all that stuff. It's a much more complex. Okay, we're still at 16 viewers. Let's see if we can get to 20. Off topic, but can't we say stoned as in battered or stoned as in like high? Of course you can say either one. Why wouldn't you? I mean, in Old English, probably not. They probably had another word for it, but I'm not sure. Can you give examples to Roa's question? Let's see. Okay, so let's say, for instance, the changes in phonology from Old English to Middle English. Not much changed, actually. The one example I can think of is the phoneme r, like a rein, which you still have in Arabic. That was lost, but they still pronounced every letter. So, like the word for knee, like the thing on my leg, would be kne. Um, to gnaw on something, like like the way dogs gnaw on stuff, they would say gnawan. They would still pronounce those letters. Um, Not a lot of pronunciation changes, but the big change that happened in phonology was from Middle English to early modern English. Some phonemes were lost. The ch sound was lost after Middle English. The great vowel shift occurred, and so some vowels were pronounced differently, and certain consonant clusters were lost. So we no longer in Middle English you could say kne or knicht, but in early modern English, the ch would have been gone and the kn sound would have been gone. Uh, we no longer pronounce the k n or g n sound, those clusters together. But from Old to Middle English, the pronunciation didn't actually change all that much. There's only one example I can think of off the top of my head. Also, one cluster, a lot of H words. Anglo-Saxons were fond of words like halaford or hnutu, but they dropped that cluster in Middle English, probably because it was kind of a mouthful. The big change from Old English to Middle English was grammar, big time. So if you can give me one example of that, you'd be fine. Johar, Chapter 7, slides on page 2. What are the main characteristics of modern English that cause them to be divided? Uh, are you asking what are the distinguishing characteristics of early modern English and how is it different from what came before? That's how I interpret your question. Yes, okay. So, oh no, okay. Chapter 7. We haven't, yeah, we haven't covered late modern English yet, so don't even think about that. Late modern English is after 1800. We haven't gotten there yet, so don't worry about it. We've only covered Old English, Middle English, and early modern. Okay, Nagam. Yes, Old English, Middle English, and early modern English. So Old English, the language of Beowulf, Middle English, the language of Chaucer, and early modern, the language of Shakespeare and even Milton, actually. Nagam asks anything specific we need to know regarding the last lecture about dictionaries. Um, Not much specific stuff, but you should probably know what was the first monolingual dictionary in English. What do we consider the first one? Maybe what were its limitations and what when it came out, and who is Samuel Johnson, and what was so great about his dictionary. I think that's probably about it. I'm not going to ask you about the grammars or anything like that. We just had fun with that stuff. Okay. Okay. I'm guessing we have a lot of lurkers. I was expecting more people, but maybe they'll come late. Can you quickly touch up on diphthongs? A diphthong is just so we have vowels, which the fancy term for that is a monophthong. Mono means one, and diphthong is when you have two vowel sounds at the same time. So, like our basic vowels are all monophthongs. So e, e, u. Those are all monophthongs. A diphthong is I or o or ow, as in house or house. Oh, those are two. Those are like, you go from one vowel sound to another with a diphthong. With a monophthong or with a simple vowel, it's just oo or e. It doesn't really. You don't shift to another one. Okay, good. Should we provide examples for the great vowel shift? You should probably know one example. I'm not going to ask you, demonstrate to me all the ways English phonology was shifted during the Great Vowel Shift. Just tell me what it is, and one example is fine. How long will this stream be? That depends on demand. In the past, I've gone for no more than 1 hour, but that's only if I had a lot of questions. Um, I'd say I'll stick around for another 10 minutes, but if I see that nobody says anything for 5 minutes, I'll cut it. I'll call it a day. So it really depends. But the absolute max is usually 1 hour. And right now we've gone for almost 33 minutes. And I just realized I'm feeling kind of hungry because I had lunch, an early lunch today. Prepositions at the end of sentences, don't worry about it. Um, Maybe a bonus question. We didn't spend much time on that stuff about the how a lot of some of the rules of grammar or the so-called rules that some of us were taught, like you cannot end a sentence with a preposition. Those came out in the 18th century, especially. So they're very recent, but don't worry about that stuff. Every time I do this, I mean, I see your usernames, of course, and occasionally a picture. And so I usually know who's who. So Johar is Johar, of course, Nagam is Nagam. But I always see a few students with random usernames like Kelsa42, I thought it was Kelsey, or Lucky Lazy Gamer. And sometimes I try to figure out who these people are. Once in a while, I get it right, but I just have to guess. You don't have to tell me who you are, by the way. I'm just thinking out loud. Okay. Okay, I think I know. Okay. Muhammad the glasses. Speaking of, another question from Johar. You mentioned that English rules are made by random. Ah, Yusuf, of course. Yes, yes. I thought your username looked familiar. Speaking of, you mentioned English rules are made by random, like literates back then, and I guess my question is, should we know some rules that failed, succeeded, and their innovators? We didn't really talk about them much. Maybe I should talk about them more next time. if you want to have one in your back pocket, be my guest. But we really didn't get into what some examples were, who came up with them. But maybe next time. But maybe you can keep that in your back pocket. But I'm not going to ask you that. It's we didn't really cover it. We might have spent 5 minutes on it, so don't worry there. Question: should we know English today is less phonetic and such? That's that's a good example of something I might ask. What does it mean to say that English is less phonetic today than it was even in the Middle English period? And it's a simple answer. So, does someone know the answer? Yeah, yeah, Johar, don't worry about it. I'm not going to ask you that. I wish we did. If we had more time, maybe we would have spent more time on it. It's an interesting subject, but don't worry about it. So, does someone know the answer to that question? Yes. Okay. So Yusuf answered his own question. If oh, okay, it's okay. That's Kel says Muhammad. Okay. Um, a language is considered more phonetic if you pronounce the letters you see. So Arabic is phonetic; it doesn't have silent letters. But English today is not very phonetic because you don't pronounce some letters, like in the word knight, as in a knight in shining armor. At least two of the letters you don't pronounce. French is even worse. You don't pronounce half the letters in French, which is something that gives a lot of students who are learning the language many difficulties. But English, it wasn't always like this. English was much more phonetic 1,000 years ago. You pronounced every letter. Okay, we're up to 37 minutes now. I think I will stick around for no more than 8 minutes unless there is a deluge of questions near the end. So if you haven't asked anything yet, you have that one burning question you want to get off your chest, now is a good time to ask. As Johar knows, it doesn't cost anything to ask a question. What about the ye or ye and ye? Okay, yeah, that's good. Okay, so in the early modern period, especially, you could write ye, ye, both ways. Or sorry, you could write ye, and it would mean two different things. So, what do those mean? Now, there's a slight difference. Ye and then y with a superscript, like a tiny e. That was the. And the reason is that in the Old and Middle English, they had the character thorn, which was a th sound. It kind of looked like a P. And when they brought printing to England, they realized, oh, there's no character for thorn. So let's just use a Y. It's close enough. So they used the Y for the th sound, even in Shakespeare's day. So sometimes if it's ye, it could be the or ye. So if it's not the, what does ye mean? Ye meant you all, if you all are doing something, if you're the subject. And oh, it's a good thing, good idea to remember the distinction between thou and thee and thou and you. What's the difference there? It was used in Shakespeare's day and in Chaucer's day as well. Johar, that was not a stab at you. Someone's got to ask the question. Someone has to be brave enough. And I've had Johar in previous classes, so I think he knows that. So yeah, so thou, thee, thou, thy, was the familiar second person or the informal second person in Middle English and in early modern English, and you was initially the object case of you plural, but in Shakespeare's day, you was, yeah, thou was informal, you became more formal or or respectful. Yeah. So the example they give in our textbook is Hamlet speaking to his mother. Hamlet was written around 1595, I believe, 1600. I don't remember the exact dates. But Hamlet refers to his mother as you, and she refers to him as thou or thee. And thou, of course, is if thou was doing something, but thee is the object. In the same case, in the same way that I am doing something, but me is the object. Why can't we say beautifuler and ain't got no money? Well, ain't got no money is it's kind of a complicated answer that you need not worry about. Why can't we say beautifuler? I actually don't know because in Shakespeare's day we could. You could say beautifuler, beautifulest, and which is why Shakespeare could get away with it. But at some point, my guess is at some point, some grammarian or maybe several grammarians said, if the word is long, you can't do that. So probably sometime in the late 17th, early 18th century. But I actually don't know the answer. But my money is on that. Someone said you can't do that, and it stuck. And it's funny how powerful some of these rules are. So many of us were taught don't end a sentence with a preposition or don't split your infinitives. And the fact is that English writers have been doing both for centuries. Chaucer breaks all these supposed rules of grammar, as did Jane Austen, and of course Shakespeare had a lot of fun with them. So these are recent rules, and in many cases, one influential rhetorician or grammarian said, "You know what? I don't like it. You can't do it anymore." And that's what they taught in schools, and it stuck. But it's something we didn't get into. Maybe we'll have some fun towards the end of the semester with that. Now I know NM means never mind, but what does MM mean? Like good or mm-mm? Which one does it mean? Like mm-mm. Okay. Okay, are there any lurkers? Anyone? There are at least 14 of you out there. Anyone who has not asked the question yet? All right, thanks for sticking around, Johar. You improve my ratings as always, and my view count, of course. All right, so it's 40. We've just passed 43 minutes. So I'll stick around for maybe 2 more minutes, see if there are any new questions, something I haven't answered yet. Yeah, if you have any, excuse me, I'm getting hungry. There's no cough or burp button like they do have with the radio. If you think of something else, yeah, you can email me. And I have office hours tomorrow, most of the afternoon, 12 to 2 and 4 to 6. I might not be around right at 12 because I'm taking over a colleague's class, but tomorrow afternoon I'll be around most of the day. And so you can pop by or just drop me an email if you think of something you forgot to ask. That's fine. All right, 44 minutes and 23 seconds. Sounds like we're winding down. Only one like? Really? Okay, maybe 30 seconds left. Yeah, it looks like we're winding down. It's been an extraordinarily long day for me, so I hope my answers were coherent and helpful and useful. And if you do think of something, yeah, you can just drop me a line. All right, you're welcome, Kelsa42. I'm glad you found it helpful. Okay, so maybe another 20 seconds. All right, thank you, Axel. So what I will do is after the exam, I will post the midterm exam I wrote 16 years ago, and you guys can compare, and you can tell me which one is tougher. But I won't do that until after you write this one. And I do honestly think this one will probably be more manageable, especially for those people who didn't do as well as you want to on the first exam. I think this one will be more manageable. Okay, another. All right, we'll see, Johar. Okay. All right, guys, that's a wrap. So for those who chimed in, thank you for your questions. For those who didn't, thank you for lurking. Don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe and all that. And I will see probably some of you tomorrow. Otherwise, I will see you guys on Wednesday. Please come on time and don't forget to bring something to write with. Okay, so have a good night.